by no means a final document. What we do want to acknowledge is that there may have been some confusion over the past few days. So we hope that by going through this this morning and interrogating it, it will allay any fears, it will clear up any confusion, provide more clarity in such a way that we can move forward and onto building something which is incredibly exciting and beautiful. Yeah. So, yeah.
Sure. I also just want to acknowledge, particularly as a non-Indigenous person, and I want to express sort of some gratitude and acknowledge the kind of privilege that I'm being given to help participate and help create this process. And thank you for that. And apologise in advance for screwing up if I and when I screw up. This document came out and was sort of shaped in part by Black Dance and by talking to many of you in the lead up to this program and became the sort of basis for a sort of the ideas document that we generated. We then put it aside and created this 3-day process. And I think that's where some of the confusion that's happened over the last few days was, because we weren't working from a concrete structure and we weren't driving toward that. We were trying to make space for everybody to be able to create that. And I think what we saw and what we knew coming in, but you know, each country carries its own issues and has challenges, and we're in different places and in different kind of states in terms of where everybody is. And so we've come back to that document, thought about it in light particularly of what was talked about yesterday, and tried to adjust it. We've made it a little more modest, I think, than it was before in terms of its scope and its ambitions. But we see it as the starting point for this idea of a network going forward, and it is just that. It is just a starting point, and hopefully that it gives us a structure for organisations and the network to begin to collaborate and for things to begin to happen. And it's in the doing that this is going to work. It's not in the talking.
So this is just a starting point.
Yep.
Yeah, a living document.
It's a living document, and I'm going to be sitting here and trying to live edit based on comments that you have as Angela, you lead us through it. Yeah?
Yeah.
So, as Emily Johnson said, I'm very aware that quite a few of you are heading off to Lisbon, because I do believe Mr. Warren will do the keynote this afternoon. Is that right? Oh, you're sitting on tomorrow. Sorry. Anyway, so you're doing I told you. So we will try to be as efficient as possible. So with your feedback, we ask that we, desire and want your feedback, but we do ask that you keep it quite concise. We don't want to stifle anyone, but we are conscious of time. So there is a bit of a preamble. So what I suggest is that we jump straight to core intentions, because that's the real guts of this document. So just to read it out. Develop institutional and audience demand for Indigenous practice work, and the commissioning, presentation and development of those artists. So through a process requiring ongoing trusted commitment and multi-year sustained investment, non-Indigenous led organisations will develop protocol and build relationships with Indigenous artists and their local Indigenous leaders and communities.
Can we live feedback? So
Yeah.
if anybody wants to
jump in.
Jump in, and I want to jump in because some of the organisations are actually
Indigenous, yeah.
So that's
Okay.
it's just a mistake.
So if anybody does, just stick your hand up and I'll come over to you with the mic. Okay.
I'm just going to say
Or just speak out. Yeah. Okay, so keeping in mind that this is a pilot, what we're initially starting off here is a pilot. So it will create a new pillar of much needed infrastructure. So it will provide a transnational informational and collaborative structure for initially 15 presenting organisations across Canada, the US and Australia. It will work toward artist-directed commissioning, presentation and touring support based on collaboration and demand with presenting organisations.
We'll go into what artist-directed means and a bit further into the document, so I'll bear with us on that.
Compulsory protocols and education for presenting organisations around the cultural specificity of collaborating with Indigenous artists and communities. The final core intention is a support for partner organisations to decolonise their internal structures, curatorial processes and programming. And that's when we were talking about cultural cultural competency yesterday, and in the first day, that is what that core intention is talking about. And yes, that is ongoing. And we are aware that organisations are all at different levels and countries as well. So most important to note is that whilst we acknowledge that there are, this is not to say that this is, we say it's new, but it's not new. We are aware that there are already existing networks, particularly within each country. So the difference is that this is a more formal, transnational structure and network. So, yes, correct. And it also, by saying it's transnational, it means we understand indigeneity to be and to have common cultural and social concerns that exist outside of, or perhaps even predate, colonial national borders. So that's, I feel, quite important. But having said that, so whilst our current focus is on artists, presenters and resources within Australia, the US and Canada, as is, this is where our relationships and research, certainly for this particular project, have initially grown and gathered momentum. Further geographies will come on board as capacity allows, and I keep looking at you, Delina, because I'm looking at the New Zealanders who certainly Australia and Canada have had very long relationships with. So, having read out those core intentions, is there, please, any feedback, anything?
Does everybody agree with those as being good intentions?
Right in the top, it just says, contemporary. And I mean, we're contemporary people, of course. However, I don't feel that we should leave out, our traditional elements. I really feel that that's the through line of where we're coming from. And I know we're developing all of the contemporary work, and it just says touring presenting Indigenous contemporary performance. I just think it's so important to widen that.
We completely agree, and we actually had thought
We thought we had taken that part out, actually. We talked.
That was a miss. Sorry.
Yeah, we had talked about that and we had taken out, we obviously missed it in one part. So, thank you.
We do see this as being a network that's focused on new work, on newly generated work, but I think we would all acknowledge that the term contemporary does not necessarily reflect the reality of Indigenous cultural artistic practice. Exactly, and that's actually, I mean, I just know for myself as
isn't our cultural practices contemporary?
yeah,
Yeah, it's real kind of like.
yeah, and it's actually, I find that kind of, just personally, just that I just think that question is so interesting and exciting to kind of unpack as a presenter, as a non-Indigenous presenter, who my whole career has been inside European kind of contemporary performance. Like, so this is like fascinating.
Is there any other feedback or anybody would like to voice an opinion?
So what then would it read?
It would so then it reads, The Global First Nations Performance Network is a transnational Indigenous-led new infrastructure resource that will increase the quality, impact and capacity for quantity, impact and capacity for Indigenous performance. The GFNPN is an innovative support infrastructure focused on cultural change, commissioning to and presenting Indigenous performance and capacity building for the Indigenous and non-Indigenous performing arts sectors. I'll go through as well. There's contemporary pops up a couple more times.
We'll find it.
And I'll find and erase.
We have a hand up over here, Angela.
Unless it's something that's not fraught, like later on it says contemporary Indigenous artists, by which I mean I'm going to change it to living.
Just one question, and maybe it's not about wordsmithing now, but a suggestion. Because the first sort of intro sentence talks about creating audience demand, there is no bullet point that speaks to audience. And I think that maybe you want to add one. The development of audience in the core intentions. You might want a bullet point that speaks directly to the development of audiences for Indigenous work.
Thank you. Any other comments, suggestions?
Yeah, so development of relationships as well, instead of just development of audience.
So development of relationships as well as development of audience.
Is there any intention, it's not a leading question, but around the question of how relations are in a network? Is there something that you're looking to propose that's different in how people see doing business or the distribution of work? Such at the core of how people relate to each other. Artists and institutions and with each other.
I think that in a way, no, there's no difference in the way that institutions collaborate habitually, except that this is a network within which these 15 institutions will collaborate. I think there is a difference in the way that we are thinking about how artists will work with those institutions, because we see that self-determination and the kind of empowerment of artists is very important, and doubly, triply so in the case of an Indigenous artist, and given the history of the way funding structures and infrastructure has engaged with the Indigenous communities and Indigenous artists. So we want to build that kind of self-determination and empowerment into the mechanisms of support that we create over time. So I think that in that sense it's very different. But no, is it gonna mean that the way, you know, Abrams might collaborate with TBA or the Darwin Festival anyway? No, but it's a piece of infrastructure that hopefully will push that to happen much more.
I think I would disagree with that.
Okay.
I would say yes, it would alter relationships because the focus is now different. The intention is different. You're now operating under certain norms, which is being habit today. But my perception of all this is that that's what's going to change to accommodate a practice which has been around for like eons, basically. So I would say yes, it will change.
It's not just a question of what you know or what you wish to know more of, but actually how you know it.
Exactly. The how. Yeah.
I feel like the final bullet point could actually be augmented slightly to underscore that the collective will work in an anti-colonial way, collectively to address exactly that. Because it does encourage us to decolonize our processes within our organizations, so perhaps the collective itself can reflect that.
Just say that once more, because there was a...
I'm just noticing in the final bullet point, it says support for partner organizations to decolonize their internal structures, curatorial processes, and programming. I'm just wondering if at the outset of that, support for partner organizations to work collectively in anti-colonial, I don't know exactly how to say this, but in anti-colonial ways, as well as to encourage them to bring this work back to their organizations. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I'm not doing it tonight.
Got it.
Anyone else? Okay. So the next part we're moving on to is membership. So this is the part where we have actually really had some somewhat deep talks with the presenting organisations, partner organisations that we have specifically invited into this space. There were 5 from Canada, 5 from the US, 5 from Australia. Not all were able to attend, but they have provided the commitment of intention. So that there is, something quite solid there, even though it isn't actually completely formalised. So to paraphrase what is pretty much written here, we see that it initially says 15 ally presenting organisations, 5 per US, Australia and Canada, and 5 to 10 works and artists. The organisation, with possible initial staff, would be housed in the United States in an effort to most dramatically affect the region and sector that is widely accepted to be furthest behind in terms of Indigenous recognition and engagement. So the 15 organisations for the pilot, this pilot program, project, we might want to change that from show. Oh, they show, sorry, these organisations show these characteristics and why we particularly started talking with them and invited them into this. So firstly, a demonstrated commitment to contemporary Indigenous artists. Living Indigenous artists. Capacity and commitment to the project. Sector impact and leadership. Diversity in geographies. For example, where in the country, are they rural, urban? The budget, the staff size, the leadership, ethnicity and gender. So these organisations, most of you who are in this room, Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, Fusebox Festival, if you could please raise your hands, thank you. Abrams Art Centre, Lee and Craig, National Arts Centre Ottawa, Kevin, Push Festival and the Colch, Push was one of our apologies, but Norman is being the eyes and ears. Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, and arts are over there. Merrigong Theatre, Simon, thank you. Darwin Festival, Felix. Horizon Festival, Ms. Zohar. The Serre and Emile Monet, they were apologies, but we were in discussions with them. Arts House Melbourne, again another one who are apologies, but have put their commitment on the table. Country Arts South Australia, Louisa over there, and Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. Ben, thank you. So the systems of this membership. Our processes and systems for project and artist support must reflect values of, most importantly, self-determination. And then the next page, if I can get it. So yes, most importantly, self-determination, equity, both for artists and across political environments. So equity regardless of where you are situated within the world. Reciprocity, generosity, and to be deeply relational. So you might see that if you have seen this document before, we did add in a few elements which we pulled from conversations. Kevin, I believe you were the one who mentioned the need for the really deep relationships that are needed. Equity, yeah.
Yes. So equity in terms of artists means that there is a kind of, again, it's about just empowerment of the artists in this process and the principle of kind of giving them agency and some level of self-determination in terms of how they work with presenters, and just, you know, being conscious and constantly aware of what is typically a deeply imbalanced power relationship between artists and presenters. And then across political environments probably means just, it does mean that there's often kind of perceived imbalances in funding and in structures between the US and Canada, or between Canada and Australia, or between, so that we're all kind of like, you know, we're not paying Australian artists less, or, you know, like that there's an equal playing field in that sense. Yeah, sure. That's, sorry, yeah.
Sure. What, geography, context?
Okay. But yeah, that's what we mean by that. And I'm happy to.
Yeah, so yeah, please, if you want to change wording, if you feel that it's not explicit enough, please speak up. So, yeah.
Yes, I see the 15 organizations, but I want to say, you know, we are holding this here in New York City. Where is the Indigenous voice? Where is our theater? Where is our presenter? We need this, and we would like for you to commit then, if you're going to be doing this process, to help us get our space here in New York City, so that we can also sit there with the 15 and be an Indigenous-run organization. I'm a self-producing artist. I had so much trouble with the, you know, trying to get the funding and this and that, and I just said, okay, I'm going around you, and I did it, you know, and like, I'm gonna be filling a 760-seat house over here at Symphony Space for the next, you know, couple of days, and so it can be done, but I just have to really say that this is great, you know, these 15. I don't really personally, I don't know if I've worked with any of you or not, but yes, if we're gonna be setting a reset button here and talking relationships and how we're going to change the world and everything, then let's get that done.
I'm just going to have this moment. Thank you. And I just want to offer a little context for some people who I know don't know the context, if you don't mind. And just to preface that by saying that this network is something that is built in the effort to support individual artists and producers, you know, so that is the effort, but the, yeah. So there is a deep frustration, as you can hear, from the New York City Indigenous performance world, because there is no space, there is no house, there is no there is an American Indian Community House, a social service organization. It is currently housed in a very tiny space. There's literally no building for gathering. There is no. Many of the cities in the United States have a cultural house where you can gather, we can have ceremony, we can have feasts, we can have performances, we can have a rehearsal space, etc. New York City, biggest city in the United States, doesn't have it. So there's deep frustration here, and there's a deep call for a space. So that is perhaps a little outside of the purview of this network. I don't know, but I hope, I hope that this network draws attention exactly to things like that.
The point that we're making here somewhere that one of the key kind of expectations is that these organisations will be building relationships with the organisations and the artists that are on the ground in the local networks, building those networks.
Something Margot, I think, really raised really strongly yesterday was the need to, and that was where kind of generosity and not reciprocity, but we talk later about the criticality of these local relationships that the organisations, particularly, I think there's a responsibility on the non-Indigenous led organisations to build these relationships locally and to make that kind of generosity and sharing of the work a focus. I don't think the network has the capacity to kind of commit to building an institution in New York, but I think we're part of the process of helping.
The organization has a capacity to advocate
That's right, exactly, yes, and that's, yeah, so,
Just for the record, everyone, I want to say that this has all been done, at least, I was present at least 2 and I think maybe 3 times that this has been attempted before. And just to clarify that this is exactly what we're talking about here, this idea. So I'm just saying this because this is really important, okay, especially for you two. Is that, because knowledge really matters, okay, knowing the situation. Is that the system is set up now for non-native led directed institutions to receive the money to do so-called diverse projects. That is the system as it is set up now, okay? So the money, the majority of the support, and I say the money because you need the money to pay the rent, to pay the artist, and to create this work, and it's naive to pretend that you don't, okay, regardless of what they're creating, that is set up to go to them, right? The system, that's the way it is. We're not going to be able to change the system, but and I certainly don't want to be a part of that because I know it's futile, but you can change how we are, but you've got to have a basic paradigm shift, and I'm not necessarily seeing that here, because the system's set up for them to get the money, they cultivate us, and that's the end of it, okay? And that has not been addressed here.
thank you for your sharing that with us.
There is a point that we have made around, in that word equity, and it's teasing out that this whole point around that the artists are,
I think that there is, one of the principles, the bedrock principles of when hopefully we are able to gather support for this organisation or network to be able to provide money and direct tangible support toward the commissioning and touring of projects, that the artist will be determining how that money is allocated in a way that is transparent and clear. And yes, the money may be paid potentially to a presenting organisation or to support the presenting organisation to pay that artist, to pay for their travel, to bring them to wherever they're going, to support that presentation. So, but that there is transparency and there is agency of the artist to determine how that money is spent. And that is absolutely explicit in this. And if I can make it more explicit, I'd be thrilled to do that, because that is one of the core principles that is closest to all of our hearts and that we feel absolutely must be there. Because that feeling, Diane, is so present and real, and not just from you, but from so many people. And actually, I think is also reflected in many, not just in the relationship of Indigenous artists to organisations, but in the relationship of artists to organisations. It's a constant, and I think addressing that, particularly in this situation, is absolutely vital. So we completely agree with you.
I'm saying I want to come on record, I want a paradigm shift. We already know what you said. We want a list of our people. We don't need paternalism. That's how, I'm telling you, that's how the system, it doesn't matter whether it's transparent or not transparent. The system is what keeps us down. We want a paradigm shift. We want to have the money come to us, and then we will work in partnership with them. We're not children. The government treats, I can only speak to this situation here because I'm from here. I can't speak to the rest of the planet. I've been through that. But here, it's a matter of public policy that the government treats Indian people like children so they can't empower. We are about self-empowering. You got a list of the usual suspects here, and it's a good list. There's nothing wrong with these people. But it's not for them to be given money for them to just hand out to us. It's for us to receive support. And great deal of what's gone on here today, I mean, and has gone on, is really scary to me. I'm really scared because here comes yet another noble idea that's gonna play out in a way that's just gonna perpetuate the suffering and the loss.
So Diane, how would you see that shift happening?
We just said it. It has, the paradigm shift is that the money and the support has to come to us.
Who's the us?
And then we choose.
Who's the us? Let's break
The
it down.
native-led and controlled organizations and groups.
In some cases, so
And then
for
we
instance-
choose, we choose a partner. It goes into our bank account, not to theirs.
And so how is that organisation that you're talking about, how is that already tied into the presenters? Or is
Well-
it? What's your relationship with that organisation, with the people in the room?
Well, since we don't have our space,
Yeah. But what's the relationship?
we have had to seek these partnerships with people
Yeah.
in order to have a place to present.
Yeah.
And
What's the relationship?
I'm talking about Australia, I'm talking about right here, right
That's
now.
right, I get that, but my question is, so then what is the relationship with that organisation that you mentioned, who you think is going to bring about this paradigm shift? What's the relationship with people in the room who can bring about further opportunities for presentation of Indigenous works?
Well, I think if the initiative is about us cultivating the artists, then why can't it be about these people? Why do they have to be paid to do this is my point.
But
And
that-
we
because
understand
that's how they are then, that's how the artist's work then gets to be, it gets into those institutions and that they are then able to support the touring and bringing it internationally and the institutions here are able to support the work coming here from Australia or from Canada.
Why
or
can't it be,
wherever else.
why can't it be a partnership? Why does it all have to go to them?
It isn't though, it's flowing through them in some cases, in some
Why does
cases
it have
it
to
might
flow
not
through
be.
them all the time?
It won't all the time.
I don't think we're determining what the payment process looks like. Because, I mean, you know, a foundation might have a rule that it needs to go to a 501c3, for instance, but in a situation we might be working with an individual artist that doesn't have a fiscal sponsor, so it's going to go to the institution that pays them. I think, you know, the way the money is allocated is determined by the artist. Whose bank account it flows through is not something I'm going to dictate into a sort of structural document like this, but I think we've heard the issue that you are raising loud and clear, and we are trying to reflect that.
I think we're also, you know, this is also, we have to get into the nuts and bolts of this at some point and maybe today is not the day, but for instance, there's certain internship grants that we apply for. The money all goes to the intern, for instance, the Indigenous intern. I think, you know, we have to examine what are the relationships with these presenting organizations with the Indigenous community to ensure that there's an investment in our community, that you're investing in our teams and helping build the capacity, not just of artists, because you're talking as presenters of artists, but we have need for people in production, we have need for people in marketing, we have all those needs whereby that organization, that presenting organization can invest in our people doing that work for us.
Address that further in the document.
Yes, I'm just saying there's a number of ways to do that, but it is really key that not all this funding is going so that the non-native presenter can look good and can check a box, and no investment has been done in our community, and those artists and those producers and those marketing people and those audience engagement people are not working for us. That's the cannibalism we talked about, and we continue to talk about. You need to be investing in our community as an equal partner.
We hear you and we agree, and we can crash through the rest of the document so that
I just want to say, I think my observation is it's also like the dynamic, as we stated earlier, the dynamic between Australia, Canada, and the United States is very different for the artists in the way that they're empowered or not empowered to do their work. It still always needs improvement on all fronts, but I think in America, as has been described, it is so at a deficit that the dynamic is just completely different. We're in completely different realms in terms of how art is funded and how it's put on stages or not, or whether or not it's ignored. And there needs to be something that helps equalize that relationship in order for there to be equity amongst our partners. And so maybe there needs to be some kind of initiative to allow for our American partners and our American cousins to be able to do their work in their own way, which would require just literally a fund of money that they can pull from, almost like a granting thing in this nation, that we can advocate for, but we from our respective nations can't really do anything directly about. But we can I think we can advocate for. We can be a bloc that can partner and to encourage the institutions down here or philanthropy down here to create a fund that is like a granting council. That's an offer. Thank you.
Thank you, and that is certainly one of the intentions of this network, is to be that strong, united transactional front that can be that advocate. And as we have mentioned, we are very well aware of the disparity between the different nations, and we are trying to equalise that. And the intention of this, and if that is the feedback and that is the need and want for this network to do something like that, then certainly we will work towards that and put that in place.
It has to be.
Yeah,
I feel like
yeah.
it's like in solidarity of,
Yeah.
like we're Canadian, but my nation extends down into northern Washington
Yeah.
State, right? Like our territory, our range is
Yeah.
beyond the border. So like we want to be in solidarity with our American partners.
So we'll put this into this document then, if we're all in agreement that that is one of our.
I think advocacy becomes something that's clearly like a critical activity of the network as a whole, and of its individual components. That each organisation needs to become an advocate in its local community and supporting the development of their local partners and their local organisation. The network as a whole, with that breadth of vision that you have and that is brought to the table across Australia and across the US, can see, and I hope the whole purpose of this was to share in that way. And from our perspective as American-based people in the field, we need you to jumpstart what's happening here. Like that's a critical need, and hopefully we can do it in less time because you're present and because you're an advocate for it. That's what we need.
What would be wrong with you having a list of Indigenous organizations who receive support to commission an artist, and then those organizations then could partner up with the other organizations?
Because there are two tiers here. There's one which is about the work development, and then there's the touring and presentation of the work. And there is actually a really good point there around, and this is the same problem in Australia, when artists are being picked up by wide organisations and being developed in that environment, and it's not a culturally safe way of working. And a visuary would be fighting for that space. It's like, we want to work with the artists in our culturally safe way of working. And then the partnership happens. So is there a tiered thing going on here?
That could be a way of structuring it.
Absolutely.
I don't know that I can articulate or have that conversation to build it in this morning, but I'd be thrilled to sit down and try and do that at another point and then build it into the
So please, everyone keep in mind that these finer details, we are not saying that they're not going to be included. This is just the beginning. So all of this is to come, and we really want to look at this in a higher capacity, I guess, or just a more overarching kind of view before we drill down into these kind of finer details, which is to say that they're not going to happen and that we're not going to do it. It's just that at this very point in time, we just do not have the time right now.
We don't have any money to spend.
Yeah, we don't have any money. We're doing this out of the, well, not the pure kindness of our heart. We have had some support, but we are, this is not in any way, shape, or form. We're not a formal organisation. We don't have formal funding, so.
Yeah. Can I also just point out that of the core intentions is to change and shift and grow the DNA of the
acknowledgement that there is different, not networks or development of an artist's career, which then does involve the two-tier system that we've just mentioned, because it is important when it comes back to the core elements. It's also important in helping us keep on track that what is happening here is the transnational, as opposed to the domestic development of artists and domestic opportunities. So I think it's important, just as a keynote, or even just a note in brackets. Because then it's a reminder that there is that consideration. It's not a priority for this, it's an offspring, and it's part of the networking, matrix of this.
Can I just push back on that a bit? Actually, I feel like I think it is two tracks. I think it is about the domestic development of the work in the regions, and then from that point on, it's the transnational sharing of that work. The network that we're gathered here for is to hold hands and create those trade routes. But in order to have those trade routes, we need the domestic development of the work in the regions where they're coming from. And so that requires investment from the partners in the room and from the network. And so it has to be seen exactly like you're saying on both those tiers simultaneously. You can't have one without the other. It's impossible. And so for me, the strength of the network is that we can begin to hold hands together as institutions, as artists, as groups, as sovereign indigenous peoples to support that work in a domestic setting and then be able to share that around the world.
What that allows is safety. It allows us to safely send our artists to another country and know that they will connect with indigenous people in that area and be supported. We do not want to send our artists unsafely over to somewhere and have them be isolated alone and wonder why they're touring, away from their family, away from their community.
I think it will also strengthen the network to somewhere having here reflective of that and of the obituaries, the Yurin Boys, the Kiamo festivals, the Talking Sticks, because at the moment, calling this a global First Nations performance network with two Indigenous groups is just actually weird. So I think it's really important if you can reflect somehow in here how those other dynamics tie in.
Where the work comes from.
Yeah,
what are the
I'm
institutions,
talking about
what are the
development
organizations?
as well as presentation.
So Vallejo is valiant.
And just to note on what you just said, I think part of the world, I always close too far, but there was a specific intention to invite many and most non-Indigenous presenting orgs into this because of those core values of cultural competency shifts so that we can create better partners to work with. So that was a core part of this shift.
There needs to be an equal focus on supporting and resourcing the Indigenous-led organisations who are already working in this space. And that needs to be somehow reflected in here. Otherwise the power is like Global First Nations group that excluding us. And I think that's just something to reflect.
What I've said in systems is we acknowledge and commit to addressing the need to support and develop this work within Indigenous-led organisations and institutions locally that provide culturally safe spaces for artistic development. So, I mean, again, like I can send all this out and you can come back with like more better wording, but it's there, and I think and that's the expression where I'm trying to reflect what you're saying to me, and then let's improve it and let's make sure that it's built into the actually how we work.
Okay, so I'm just going to keep us moving, and if there is more feedback, give it to us afterwards. We'll keep putting this document into the document. It is a live document. We will distribute it. If there's more feedback, it can be further manipulated because this is just the beginning and the very first gathering. This is not the be-all and end-all.
So this year.
This year is when it's all happening. 2019.
What do we do?
Yeah. So program 2019. We begin this work. So the final selection and invitation of all partner organisations. That we say final. It's the initial. I think is probably a better way of putting it. New York City convening and platform in January 2019. You're all here. I hope you've all been enjoying KIN, our performance space. Play readings tonight at La Mama. You've seen the program. It's happening. We say a potential second gathering. It's perhaps not potential. We're pretty firm on that there will be a second gathering this year, and we are looking for some hosts for that. And I might be looking in Canada's direction. Creation of a more formal board advisory council. So, you know, the work that we've been doing, this is just something we're inspired to do, but there is no formal. Like, we know we don't speak on behalf of everybody, and so we do need this creation so that there is proper representation, you know, for this. And an actual creation of an organisation, something formal. So, you know, setting up of staffing and policy structure for the network. So, you know, perhaps just one full-time person who is managing this behemoth. So the initial focus is to build a set of collaborative relationships between organisations to bring ideas, projects and artists forward for commissioning and touring. The longer term process, which is subject to funding, say, and this is an example, once 2 or more presenters within the network, within and across national borders, agree on a work and/or artist. There's a substantial grant for those organisations to commission, present, tour the artist, work is triggered basically. This support will be allocated by the artist, and as Vallejo has reiterated time and time again how important that is, you know, the allocation by the artist amongst the presenting partner organisation to support that commissioning and subsequent touring, so that the decision making really is firmly in the hands of the artist. So, as we've written, to stress the allocation of those potential resources and support granted to each project will be artist-led and transparent. So partners will engage with each other and support the development of Indigenous practice within their teams, so not just projects. Presence within their teams. Decolonisation protocols and processes will begin to be developed with the network for each organisation. So obviously, as you've talked, you know, this is there will be 2 kind of parallel, you know, things that are happening. The local Indigenous led, there are the non-Indigenous, you know, so some of this may not be completely relevant. It's tailored, sorry, it's bespoke. Bespoke is a better way of putting it. So we have mentioned that this is a pilot program. So the pilot program outcomes and impacts. So what are they for Indigenous artists? And again, please provide feedback. For Indigenous artists, it will be the artist's capacity to operate within international markets. It's significantly enhanced. Convenings will improve Indigenous artists' knowledge and capacity to collaborate, share learning and plan. A platform for assessment is created for future activity and planning. Relationships developed between and across internationally based Indigenous and non-Indigenous peers deepen access to the sector internationally. So for the partner organisations, what are their outcomes and impacts? A network of dedicated and influential presenters and programmers is developed, supporting Indigenous artists, arts companies and arts leaders. Increased capacity of international presenters, producers, directors and curators to better understand and program Indigenous performance. Please remove contemporary. Their processes and people go through a process of decolonisation. Opportunities are created for Indigenous individuals within the organisations as staff and as leaders. So one thing that we have often talked about is the fact that no major, certainly what we call in Australia, major arts organisations is led by an Indigenous person, and that's not the case in Australia. I know that it is the case in other countries, but there needs to be more of that, pretty much. What was I up to? Oh, exchange between partner organisations for individuals, artwork and systems. So for stakeholders and supporters, what are their outcomes and impacts? Indigenous arts leaders learn about and engage with their priority international markets and create long-term global relationships. A richer, more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of self-determined opportunities for the performing arts sector is achieved. An increased knowledge and understanding of contemporary Indigenous artists and their work leads to strategic opportunities in priority international markets. Those in the network are recognised for taking a lead role internationally in proactively supporting, promoting and advocating for Indigenous artists and global opportunities for their performing arts practice. Any feedback? Amendments? You want to cut the last one?
I don't think those in the network getting recognition should be something that we put
Yeah.
as a interesting outcome.
Are we all in agreement with that? They shouldn't get recognition? I see what you're saying, and that it's something that should just happen.
I just say they build recognition.
Yeah, well, no, I think the idea of, I don't know why that was there, actually. I mean, it's a kind of, it was probably written at 3 o'clock in the morning while we were stressed out on a far country phone call, you know, so it was probably good.
Yeah. So we'll all delete that one out. Yeah.
I think that there should be an outcome in there that reflects some of this conversation around other local organisations.
Yeah.
That's where this needs to live, as well as in other parts that are in the process. So,
I think that there needs to be something that states that we support or
Want to help their investment, especially in the local artwork, artists, like that there is actual financial investment.
Yep.
That we as a block should be advocating for that, especially for the United States.
Yeah, we'll put that in.
Can we also maybe add something about we're always reconnecting to the Global First Nations Network presenters, artists, and producers, which we really want to develop on our own.
Yep.
And how important that is going to be in reflecting on this.
So finding the support and the space to for the First Nations. For us to get together. I know exactly what you're talking about. That what we've done in Australia many times. You know, where we have our First Nations exchange, and you know where New Zealand. You guys have been there. You were all there last year at APAM. Is what you're talking about.
Sort of,
yeah.
a bit of that, but also that we create some evolving protocols and principles and evolve with each of our own communities as well as our larger global Indigenous community. And that's always reflected within this Global First Nations network, which is non-Indigenous Indigenous. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And can I point
I
out?
don't understand what that
Can I point out
means,
in that
sorry.
though, Denise? Can I just point out in that, which has been said, but just to say it again, there is no network of that kind in the United States.
Well, and we don't have that network in Canada. We haven't had an opportunity to create our own network here, or in Canada, let alone internationally. We haven't had the opportunity to really discuss our own network. It's always been a combined conversation. So the opportunity for us to get to that place will also benefit this network. Which is a very different network than our own sovereign-based network, where we can address issues of what's happening here in New York and the United States, and what kind of advocacy needs to be done on a ground level, on a national level, local, and then international, and how we can work with our allies, which I hate that word, our partners and friends, so that you are able to have the language, the support, the ability to support locally and nationally here in the United States. I think we want to support our Indigenous communities too. and be able to have those conversations.
So I think it's important to note that this global First Nations network is ours. It is First Nations, this network. I know it seems that there is a focus on these partner non-Indigenous, organisations, but they are more invited in to this network at our behest to, I guess, for us to take advantage of them, really.
But that's not reflected in the document.
Yeah, okay.
That's what we're saying, is like, that's not reflected in the rounding foundational document that we're describing.
Okay.
And that's been brought up a couple of times. What we're seeing is like 2 First Nations organizations and then a whack of non-Indigenous ally institutions who still hold the power.
Okay,
so that's the dynamic shift that we're looking at.
We haven't had the actual opportunity to even talk to our Indigenous global First Nations collaborators at all.
Okay.
I just want to say something, this is not the first. Okay, again, like I said, this has been going, there's been 2 or 3 attempts at this, and the Native people in the United States do know one another. Okay, and we have organized, but it requires energy and effort, and most people in most communities, whether urban or rural, in here, want to do exactly what everybody is saying, the Indian Native people are saying here, is they want to enrich that local artistic community and develop and create more opportunity to create the work, present, and recognition, and have that blossom. Okay? That's what they want to do. That's how we do our work now.
So this is exactly what we want to know and what we want to put into this document. So yes, so we're attempting to put it in now, and there will be more opportunity after, because we're doing this a bit quickly now, but we want to get this right and get that explicit wording in there. So.
Listening to this conversation and going back to the document, it seems to me that part of it starts with the language around membership, where it says that it initially serves 15 ally presenting organizations. And I think that we are really talking about supporting Indigenous performance, and it needs to start there.
So that's a really great point, thank you. So we see that it initially, or that it's not initially, because the goal is that it's always going to serve the Indigenous performing arts sector and developing audiences for that. I think I just want to answer, I think where that probably in my era language there, where I often think that, the best way we can serve artists and the development of that work is to kind of leverage off and present it in a really effective way. And so it's just, I see a mistake, or the era of emphasis.
Sorry, I'll be just over to, so I think it does call, as an ally organization who was invited to this, I felt called to action and to contribute